Imagine a world where your closest friend is your greatest threat. A world where loyalty is a weapon and betrayal a tool. History is filled with such stories, tales of emperors and generals, of political masterminds and their calculated betrayals. Are your friends truly your allies, or are they merely waiting for their moment? Prepare to question everything you thought you knew about trust as we delve into the dark art of power. In the middle of the 9th century AD, a young man named Michael III, often called Michael the Drunkard, ascended to the throne of the Byzantine Empire at the age of 16. His mother, Empress Theodora, who had ruled as regent since Michael was a toddler, had been forcibly removed from power and sent to live in a convent. Her close advisor and rumoured lover, Theoctistus, had been assassinated in a plot orchestrated by Michael's uncle, Bardas. Bardas, a man in his late 40s known for his sharp intellect and unyielding ambition, had masterminded the conspiracy to depose Theodora and place Michael on the throne. Now, as the new emperor, Michael found himself surrounded by a court filled with schemers, murderers, and those who sought only to advance their own interests. In this dangerous environment, Michael needed someone he could trust completely. His thoughts turned to Basilius, his closest friend. Basilius, a young man in his early 20s, had no experience in politics or governance. His background was in managing the royal stables. But he had repeatedly demonstrated his loyalty and gratitude to Michael. Surely, Michael thought, this man would never betray him. They had met a few years earlier when Michael, then a teenager, was visiting the royal stables and a wild horse broke loose. Basilius, a young groom of humble Macedonian origins, had saved Michael's life. Impressed by his bravery, Michael elevated Basilius from obscurity to the position of head stable master. He showered his friend with gifts, sent him to the finest schools, and transformed the rough peasant into a polished courtier. The two became inseparable. Now that Michael was emperor, he needed a loyal advisor. Who better to trust with the post of chamberlain and chief counselor than a young man who owed him everything? Basilius could be trained for the job, and Michael loved him like a brother. Ignoring the advice of those who recommended the much more qualified Bardas, Michael chose his friend. Basilius learned quickly, and soon began advising the emperor on all matters of state. The only problem seemed to be money. Basilius never had enough. Exposure to the splendor of Byzantine court life made him greedy for the perks of power. Michael doubled, then tripled his salary, ennobled him, and even married him off to his own mistress, Eudoxia Ingerina. Keeping such a trusted friend and advisor satisfied was worth any price. But trouble was brewing. Bardas, now head of the army, became a target of Basilius's manipulation. Basilius convinced Michael that Bardas, now in his 50s, was hopelessly ambitious. Under the illusion that he could control his nephew, Bardas had conspired to put him on the throne, and he could conspire again, this time to get rid of Michael and assume the crown himself. Basilius poured poison into Michael's ear until the emperor agreed to have his uncle murdered. During a great horse race, Basilius closed in on Bardas in the crowd and stabbed him to death. Soon after, Basilius asked that he replace Bardas as head of the army, where he could keep control of the realm and quell rebellion. This request was granted. Now Basilius's power and wealth only grew. A few years later, Michael, in financial straits from his own extravagance, asked Basilius to repay some of the money he had borrowed over the years. To Michael's shock and astonishment, Basilius refused, with a look of such impudence that the emperor suddenly realized his predicament. The former stable boy had more money, more allies in the army and senate, and in the end, more power than the emperor himself. A few weeks later, after a night of heavy drinking, Michael awoke to find himself surrounded by soldiers. Basilius watched as they stabbed the emperor to death. Then, after proclaiming himself emperor, he rode his horse through the streets of Byzantium, brandishing the head of his former benefactor and best friend at the end of a long pike. Interpretation: Michael III had placed his trust in the gratitude he believed Basilius owed him. He assumed that Basilius would remain loyal given the wealth, education, and status he had bestowed upon him. But as Basilius rose in power, Michael failed to recognize the danger. He continued to indulge Basilius, believing their bond was unbreakable. It was only when he saw the smug smile on Basilius's face that Michael realized his fatal error. Michael had created a monster. By giving Basilius a taste of power, he had ignited an insatiable hunger for more. Basilius, like many who rise through the favor of others, began to believe he had earned his success through his own merit. He forgot the kindness that had lifted him from obscurity and saw only the path to greater power. Michael's blindness to the threat cost him his life. Friendship and trust had clouded his judgment, and he refused to believe betrayal was possible until it was too late. For several centuries after the fall of the Han Dynasty, AD 222, Chinese history followed the same cycle of brutal and bloody coups, one after the other. Army men would scheme to assassinate a feeble sovereign, then would supplant him on the dragon throne with a strong general. The general would start a new dynasty and crown himself emperor. To secure his own endurance, he would eradicate his fellow officers. A few years later, however, the cycle would resume. New generals would rise up and assassinate him or his sons in their turn. To be sovereign of China was to be alone, surrounded by a pack of enemies. It was the least powerful, least secure position in the realm. In AD 959, General Zhao Guangyin became Emperor Sung. He knew the likelihood that within a year or two he would be assassinated. How could he break the pattern? Soon after becoming emperor, Sung ordered a feast to commemorate the new dynasty and summoned the most powerful officers in the army. After they had become intoxicated with wine, he disbanded the sentinels and everybody else except the generals, who now dreaded he would assassinate them in one fell swoop. Instead, he addressed them. "The whole day is spent in unease, and I am unhappy both at the table and in my bed. For which one of you does not dream of ascending the throne? I do not doubt your loyalty, but if by some opportunity your underlings, pursuing wealth and position, were to force the emperor's yellow robe upon you in turn, how could you refuse it?" Intoxicated and fearing for their lives, the generals proclaimed their innocence and their loyalty. But Sung had other ideas. The best way to pass one's days is in peaceful enjoyment of riches and honor. If you are willing to give up your commands, I am ready to provide you with fine estates and splendid dwellings where you may take your pleasure with singers and girls as your companions. The surprised generals recognized that instead of a life of anxiety and struggle, Sung was offering them riches and security. The next day, all of the generals tendered their resignations, and they retired as nobles to the estates that Sung bestowed on them. In one stroke, Sung turned a pack of friendly wolves, who would likely have deceived him, into a group of docile lambs, far from all authority. Over the next few years, Sung continued his endeavor to safeguard his rule. In AD 971, King Lin of the southern Han finally surrendered to him after years of revolt. To Lin's astonishment, Sung gave him a rank in the imperial court and summoned him to the palace to seal their newfound friendship with wine. As King Lin took the glass that Sung offered him, he faltered, fearing it contained poison. "Your subjects' crimes certainly merit death," he cried out, "but I beg your majesty to spare your subject's life. Indeed, I dare not drink this wine." Emperor Sung laughed, took the glass from Lin, and swallowed it himself. There was no poison. From then on, Lin became his most trusted and loyal subject. At the time, China had splintered into many smaller kingdoms. When Qianshu, the king of one of these, was defeated, Sung's ministers advised the emperor to imprison this rebel. They presented documents recording that he was still conspiring to assassinate Sung. When Qianshu came to visit the emperor, however, instead of imprisoning him, Sung respected him. He also gave him a package, which he told the former king to open when he was halfway home. Qianshu opened the bundle on his return journey and saw that it contained all the papers documenting his conspiracy. He recognized that Sung knew of his murderous plans, yet had spared him nonetheless. This benevolence won him over, and he too became one of Sung's most loyal subjects. A Chinese proverb compares friends to the jaws and teeth of a dangerous animal. If you are not careful, you will find them chewing you up. Emperor Sung knew the jaws he was passing between when he assumed the throne. His friends in the army would chew him up like meat, and if he somehow survived, his friends in the government would have him for supper. A Chinese proverb compares friends to the jaws and teeth of a dangerous animal. If you are not careful, you will find them chewing you up. Emperor Sung knew the jaws he was passing between when he assumed the throne. His friends in the army would chew him up like meat, and if he somehow survived, his friends in the government would have him for supper. Emperor Sung would have no truck with friends. He bribed his fellow generals with splendid estates and kept them far away. This was a much better way to emasculate them than killing them, which would only have led other generals to seek vengeance, and Sung would have nothing to do with friendly ministers. More often than not, they would end up drinking his famous cup of poisoned wine. Instead of relying on friends, Sung used his enemies, one after the other, transforming them into far more reliable subjects. While a friend expects more and more favors and seethes with jealousy, these former enemies expected nothing and got everything. A man suddenly spared the guillotine is a grateful man indeed, and will go to the ends of the earth for the man who has pardoned him. In time, these former enemies became Sung's most trusted friends, and Sung was finally able to break the pattern of coups, violence, and civil war. The Sung dynasty ruled China for more than 300 years. In a speech Abraham Lincoln delivered at the height of the Civil War, he referred to the Southerners as fellow human beings who were in error. An elderly lady chastised him for not calling them irreconcilable enemies who must be destroyed. "Why, madam," Lincoln replied, "do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends?" Interpretation. Emperor Sung understood the dangers of relying on friends who could turn into rivals or betrayers. Instead, he focused on neutralizing his enemies by offering them wealth and comfort, stripping them of their power without bloodshed. By sparing his rivals and treating them with generosity, he turned potential foes into loyal subjects. This strategy allowed him to break the cycle of violence and establish the Sung dynasty, which ruled China for over 3 centuries. It is a natural inclination to engage your comrades when confronted with periods of adversity. The world is a severe environment, and your associates mitigate the severity. Furthermore, you are acquainted with them. Why rely on a superior individual when you possess a companion readily available? The challenge lies in the fact that you frequently do not comprehend your companions as thoroughly as you presume. Associates often concur on matters to avert a dispute. They conceal their disagreeable traits to avoid causing offense to one another. They guffaw excessively at each other's witticisms. Since candor seldom fortifies camaraderie, you might never discern how a companion genuinely feels. Acquaintances will assert they admire your poetry, revere your melodies, covet your fashion sense. Perhaps they are sincere, but frequently they are not. When you choose to employ a companion, you progressively unveil the attributes he or she has maintained concealed. Oddly enough, it is your act of benevolence that disrupts everything. Individuals desire to perceive they merit their fortunate circumstances. The reception of a favor can become burdensome. It signifies you have been selected due to your friendship, not necessarily because you are deserving. There is almost a hint of disdain in the act of hiring friends that covertly troubles them. The harm will manifest gradually, a bit more sincerity, glimpses of animosity and jealousy here and there, and before you realize it, your friendship diminishes. The more favors and gifts you offer to revive the camaraderie, the less gratitude you receive. Ingratitude possesses a lengthy and profound history. It has demonstrated its capabilities for numerous centuries, that it is truly astonishing that individuals persist in underestimating them. It is preferable to be cautious. If you never anticipate gratitude from a friend, you will be pleasantly surprised when they indeed prove grateful. The issue with utilizing or employing friends is that it will inevitably restrict your influence. The friend is seldom the most capable individual to assist you, and ultimately, proficiency and capability are far more crucial than amicable sentiments. Michael III had an individual directly before him who would have guided him correctly and preserved his existence. That individual was Bardas. All professional scenarios necessitate a degree of separation between individuals. You are endeavoring to function, not cultivate friendships. Amiability, authentic or fabricated, merely obscures that reality. The key to influence, therefore, is the aptitude to determine who is best suited to advance your objectives in all scenarios. Retain friends for companionship, but collaborate with the adept and competent. Your adversaries, conversely, are an untapped resource that you must learn to exploit. When Talleyrand, Napoleon's foreign minister, resolved in 1807 that his superior was leading France to devastation, and the moment had arrived to oppose him, he recognized the perils of plotting against the emperor. He required an ally, a partner. Which friend could he trust in such an endeavor? He selected Joseph Fouché, chief of the secret police, his most detested adversary, an individual who had even attempted to have him assassinated. He comprehended that their prior loathing would generate an opportunity for an emotional reconciliation. He understood that Fouché would anticipate nothing from him, and in fact would labor to demonstrate that he was worthy of Talleyrand's selection. An individual who has something to prove will exert immense effort for you. Finally, he grasped that his relationship with Fouché would be predicated on mutual self-interest and would not be tainted by personal emotions. The choice proved impeccable. Although the conspirators did not succeed in overthrowing Napoleon, the alliance of such potent yet improbable partners generated considerable interest in the cause. Opposition to the emperor gradually commenced to proliferate, and from that point onward, Talleyrand and Fouché enjoyed a productive working relationship. Whenever feasible, reconcile with an adversary and prioritize placing him in your employ. As Lincoln articulated, you neutralize an adversary when you transform him into a companion. In 1971, during the Vietnam War, Henry Kissinger was the target of an unsuccessful abduction attempt, a conspiracy involving, among others, the renowned anti-war activist priests, the Berrigan brothers, 4 additional Catholic priests, and 4 nuns. In private, without notifying the Secret Service or the Justice Department, Kissinger arranged a Saturday morning meeting with 3 of the alleged abductors. Explaining to his visitors that he would have the majority of American soldiers withdrawn from Vietnam by mid-1972, he thoroughly captivated them. They presented him with some "Kidnap Kissinger" buttons, and one of them remained a friend of his for years, visiting him on numerous occasions. This was not merely a singular tactic. Kissinger established a policy of collaborating with those who disagreed with him. Colleagues remarked that he appeared to interact more effectively with his adversaries than with his companions. Without adversaries surrounding us, we become indolent. An adversary at our heels sharpens our intellect, maintaining us focused and vigilant. It is occasionally preferable, then, to employ adversaries as adversaries rather than converting them into companions or allies. Mao Zedong perceived discord as pivotal in his methodology to authority. In 1937, the Japanese invaded China, interrupting the civil conflict between Mao's communists and their foe, the nationalists. Dreading that the Japanese would annihilate them, certain communist leaders advocated permitting the nationalists to confront the Japanese and utilizing the interval to recuperate. Mao demurred. The Japanese could not conceivably vanquish and occupy a vast nation like China for an extended duration. Once they departed, the communists would have become sluggish if they had been out of combat for several years, and would be ill-prepared to resume their struggle with the nationalists. To engage a formidable antagonist like the Japanese in actuality would be the consummate training for the communists' motley army. Mao's strategy was adopted, and it succeeded. By the period the Japanese ultimately withdrew, the communists had acquired the combat expertise that facilitated their triumph over the nationalists. Years subsequently, a Japanese visitor attempted to apologize to Mao for his nation's incursion of China. Mao interjected, "Should I not express gratitude instead?" Without a worthy challenger, he elucidated, an individual or group cannot become more potent. Mao's approach of perpetual conflict encompasses several fundamental elements. Firstly, ascertain that in the protracted term you will emerge triumphant. Never initiate a confrontation with someone you are not certain you can overcome, as Mao comprehended the Japanese would be vanquished in due course. Secondly, if you possess no apparent adversaries, you must occasionally establish a convenient objective, even transforming a companion into an antagonist. Mao employed this stratagem repeatedly in politics. Thirdly, utilize such adversaries to delineate your cause more distinctly to the populace, even framing it as a battle of virtue against depravity. Mao actually fostered China's disagreements with the Soviet Union and the United States. Without explicit adversaries, he believed, his populace would forfeit any perception of what Chinese communism signified. A sharply defined adversary is a far more compelling argument for your faction than all the verbiage you could possibly assemble. Never permit the presence of adversaries to perturb or distress you. You are far better positioned with a declared opponent or two than not comprehending where your genuine adversaries reside. The individual of authority welcomes discord, employing adversaries to augment his reputation as a steadfast combatant who can be relied upon in periods of uncertainty. The jaws of ingratitude. Comprehending what would transpire if you inserted a digit into the maw of a lion, you would maintain distance from it. With companions, you will possess no such prudence, and if you employ them, they will devour you alive with ingratitude. Discern how to utilize adversaries for your own advantage. You must acquire the ability to grasp a sword not by its edge, which would lacerate you, but by the hilt, which enables you to defend yourself. The sagacious individual profits more from his adversaries than a dolt from his companions. Inversion. Although it is generally advisable not to commingle labor with camaraderie, there are instances when a companion can be utilized to greater consequence than an adversary. An individual of authority, for instance, often has menial tasks that must be executed, but for the sake of appearances, it is generally preferable to have other individuals perform them for him. Companions often accomplish this most effectively, since their affection for him renders them willing to assume risks. Also, if your schemes falter for some rationale, you can utilize a companion as a convenient scapegoat. This fall of the favorite was a stratagem frequently employed by kings and monarchs. They would permit their closest companion at court to assume the blame for a blunder, since the populace would not believe that they would deliberately sacrifice a companion for such a purpose. Of course, after you deploy that tactic, you have forfeited your companion permanently. It is advisable then to reserve the scapegoat function for someone who is proximate to you, but not excessively proximate. Finally, the issue regarding collaborating with companions is that it confounds the boundaries and distances that labor necessitates. But if both parties in the arrangement comprehend the perils involved, a companion often can be engaged to considerable consequence. You must never diminish your vigilance in such an endeavor, however. Always be observant for any indications of emotional perturbation, such as jealousy and ingratitude. Nothing is stable in the realm of authority, and even the closest of companions can be transmuted into the most detestable of adversaries. Throughout history, the greatest leaders understood one universal truth: trust is fragile, and power is fleeting. From Michael III's tragic downfall to Emperor Sung's ingenious strategies, these stories remind us that the art of navigating alliances and rivalries is as relevant today as it was centuries ago. But history isn't just about the past, it's about the lessons we carry forward. What can we learn from these tales of betrayal and triumph? How can we apply these strategies in our own lives? If you found this video insightful, don't miss out on more stories like this. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Together, let's uncover the secrets of history and apply them to the modern world. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, remember, in the game of power, the wisest move is always to stay one step ahead.